Tim and I met in an English literature class our junior year of college, and we've been together the 10 years since. While he ended up going into IT, I stayed in the liberal arts track and ended up doing non-profit work after college when I realized I didn't actually want to be a school teacher. Just to say that we always assumed he'd out-earn me by a considerable margin. Though when he made more, I always insisted we split things evenly to avoid potential resentment down the road. I've had sort of a non-linear career path, but ended up switching to the corporate world. To make a long story short, my liberal arts degree and time doing non-profit work gave me a lot of skills that enable me to really excel professionally in some more niche areas. I recently started a new job as a consultant, making way more than I'd ever anticipated. When I got the offer, I told Tim that the pay was amazing, but he didn't ask about the actual amount, and I didn't want to be braggy about it, especially since I was fairly sure it was above his current income. Well, we just put in an application for a new place, and in the process of having to submit our pay stubs, it's become obvious that I make roughly 30% more than he does now. I expected him to think that was cool, since he's a feminist and has always been super supportive of my career. But instead he started to make increasingly harsh jabs about how I cheated the system to get where I am. That no English Lit major makes more than a cybersecurity professional without cheating somehow. His major point is that I got my first job out of nepotism, which set me up to trample more qualified people who didn't have the same advantages. It's true that I got my first post-college job after being referred by a sorority sister, but it was for non-profit work making $22K /year, not exactly at somebody's daddy's firm. He also points out that at my first corporate job, I snagged a big promotion after volunteering to take on starting up the company's diversity /equity / inclusion program, and I'll admit that were I a white man, it's highly unlikely I would have been able to be the face of the eventually high-profile diversity program. Tim also notes that I was awarded a small college scholarship for being a promising female writer, when no such scholarship existed for males. But all that said, I still don't feel like I cheated the system, and it makes me angry to listen to him joke about it. Especially since I grew up blue-collar and worked full-time while going to school full-time to afford my degree. I reached a breaking point yesterday when he made a crack about how the new / first woman on his team is an obvious diversity hire. I told him that his jokes about women cheating the system to get ahead aren't funny or guy talk ribbing, as he says. They make him sound like an insecure little boy. He told me I was being a naive Karen, and we haven't really talked since yesterday. I used to work on a small team for a division of a multinational company. We used to primarily be staffed by what were called old-timers. Basically people who were close to being of a pensionable age who didn't want the hustle. That culture shifted and a lot of young blood has been brought in. I formerly worked there and was given a lateral move out. A colleague, Tina, still works there. Recently an opening for director came up and Tina came to me for help. She's been doing overtime and working hard to get noticed for this position. She's well qualified for it and has extensive experience at the company, so she was given a chance to interview for it. Tina is a single mother who has overcome poverty in childhood, racists / bigots in the industry, and worked hard to support her kids. She's had health issues but always fought hard. Tina is tenacious and hardworking, but there are issues. She struggles in some areas, and while she'd definitely make a great director as she's contentious, kind and courteous, the role is evolving and may be a bit of a stretch. Nonetheless, I helped her with her application and presentation. Beyond being colleagues, she and I are friends. We spend a lot of time outside of work together. We're the only women of color in our respective areas, and share a lot of our deep feelings and thoughts. She worked hard and put together a good presentation. I was really proud of her. She presented this morning at 9:30 and got through it and was out by 10 o'clock. Most of the other applicants were internal and interviewed yesterday, but one person was recommended by a senior VP in a different department. The guy who was recommended is a 30-year-old hotshot. I think he may actually be in his late 20s. He will soon graduate from an Ivy League MBA and is the definition of corporate style. They gave him a last-minute presentation slot immediately following Tina. I attended all of the presentations. I am not on the hiring committee, but was there to support Tina and see how the presentations went. When the hotshot gave his presentation, it wasn't even close. The 20 of us sat in the room and were dumbfounded. Not only was his presentation visually appealing, but he noticed details none of us ever did, and he developed a pitch that was so innovative that our AVP asked to use a tagline he created. His technical analysis was so spot on that it was spooky. He understood issues facing our business unit without having to be told and had ready solutions to solve the problems. Questions they asked him were more about how he'll do things when he takes over the role. It was made very clear to him that this was his job, and they even provided an unofficial tentative start date. It is very clear that he understands the industry and his past experiences, such as professional work experience as well as winning top case competitions and academic awards, prepared him very well. The presentations were in totally different leagues. After he finished, he made a self-deprecating joke and took questions. He thanked us and left. We all sat there for a minute chatting when the AVP very loudly told the HR director to offer significantly above the salary and hammer out a start date immediately and get a contract signed. The VP who recommended him knew him from the MBA program, as the VP is a case coach there. He said he'd be his reference, and they are skipping all the formalities and going right to the offer. Tina has no idea. She was so happy with her performance, and she's sure she nailed it. She did well, about as well as the other candidates, but this guy is out and out in a different league. Just based on that, I too would hire the other guy. She's sitting on cloud 9 at her desk and planning a celebratory dinner to celebrate her performance. She was told decisions would be made in a couple of weeks. At this rate, it's likely she'll be informed that she didn't get the job well before 5 p.m. I really don't know what to do or say. If she asks, should I be honest about this guy's presentation? Should I avoid her the rest of the day? I want to support her, but have no idea how to even begin talking to her. My unmarried partner lives with me and my children, who are 7, 12, and 18. He has 2 children aged 5 and 13, but they live with their mother. We've had his kids over whenever we can, and I enjoy it. However, they are very different to mine, who are all mostly easygoing and respectful. And it has been just the 4 of us for most of their lives. His kids are very loud, destructive, and demanding often. We made the adjustment, and eventually they started staying over every other weekend. But his son, Spencer, has become harder to deal with over time. He'll blow up if he doesn't get his way, insult my son if he loses a game, goes into the bedrooms and takes things without asking, complains about every meal we make, expects us to buy him whatever he wants no matter cost, and generally acts like a spoiled brat. He can also be sweet, of course. He's a child and he's not evil, but this is fairly constant. We don't let it slide, but I also want to give him benefit of the doubt. He's 13, he could be acting out for lots of reasons with a weird family dynamic, I'm sure. I try my hardest to help him feel comfortable and heard //us, but his entitlement is rampant. It started to stress my kids out, and yesterday was the last straw for me. We were all about to go to the mall when my 12Y//O son asked if anyone had seen his birthday money. He had $100 saved, disappeared from his desk. Everyone, including Spencer, looked everywhere. Spencer even asked my son if he'd spent it and forgot, or if he'd left it at school, etc. Spencer then went outside to sit in the car alone and wait to leave. My partner went out to talk to him, which eventually led to getting him to empty his pockets. He had stolen the $100 to spend at the mall. My partner told him off, texted his mom about it, and told me, then gave it back to my son. Quietly furious, we went out as planned after a talk with Spencer as to not ruin the day for the other kids. He didn't seem to feel guilty at all, even asked us to get him a $120 jacket while out. Once they were back at their mom's, I told my partner I don't want Spencer in the house anymore, at least for now. I do love his kids, and I don't want them to not see their dad. My partner has a house he doesn't use, so I suggested on those weekends we take the kids there for now. Then when any of mine aren't feeling it, they can go home and we can get some quality time, and so his kids don't have to share his attention as much. He thinks this is dramatic, an overreaction. I've told him I'm open to other ideas but won't budge from my stance. I don't want my kids feeling like they need to guard their space or to be uncomfortable in their own home. My youngest has autism and gets overstimulated with them around sometimes. He gets along W//5Y//O but needs breaks. My 12Y//O is quite anxious and 18Y//O has bipolar disorder. They're introverted, home is their safe haven and weekends are the only real free time they have. But I also don't want to be unfair to his kids. I have been with my partner for 7 years. We initially met online, and after meeting in person a few times and realizing our affection for one another, we found it promising to move in together. I moved from California to Pennsylvania to be with him throughout graduate school. All was seemingly well during this time. I have never really had any reason to not trust him. I encouraged him to very much so, to try his best to make friends, or to explore hobbies on his own outside of the various ones we share, because I have my own passions. And I found we connected most when we met in the middle through conversations about these passions, through the act of explaining or showcasing what we've taken in or learned. Throughout these 7 years, he has struggled with very low self-esteem. And though I don't necessarily think of myself as the pillar of self-love, the depth of mine doesn't reach the low perception of his self-value. Because of this, he has seen and stopped seeing both a counselor and a therapist, and has been on medication to help for the last 6 months. Things were seemingly well between us, and continued to be pretty fluid. We continued to share things, and take long walks, and were pretty open-ended about where we stood in the relationship. If one was feeling a bit of an ebb, the other would pick up more of a share, and vice versa. However, things took a bit of a dip about 2 days ago when I felt the ebb and asked him about it. Initially, he said there was really nothing wrong. And perhaps I was just feeling this way because with our schedules we haven't been able to see one another for long periods of time like we are used to, which is true. But the feeling continued to irk me, and when I asked about it a second time, he confessed to me. He had begun talking to another girl from another country via Instagram direct messages. And though things between she and him never crossed the boundaries of platonic friendship, he really loved the initial rush of someone asking him questions about his favorite movie, his favorite album, his favorite book. All things he and I already know very well about one another. I asked if he'd sent any selfies, or anything risque, and he said no, though I can't confirm, because he deleted the messages. A good deal of me believes him, because of how open he was about the initial conversations to begin with. We slept apart, and I just felt really confused the entire night, because I couldn't really resonate with wanting that sort of attention from someone else. If anything, his yearning for that type of attention sort of hurt. It felt like I wasn't doing enough, or giving enough. The next morning, though I don't have an Instagram, and am not on the app, I went to check his using the desktop version, and found that posts where he once called me the love of his life, or a specific post with a gift I gave him that once said, "Greatest gift from the greatest girl," were still on his profile, but the words, girlfriend, or love of my life, were completed erased. With this realization, my confusion and hurt turned to very real heartache. I called him and asked if he had deleted these words from the specific posts, and with shame, he said yes, he did. When I asked why, he said it was because he just didn't want the attention from the girl asking him about himself to be disrupted if she found out he was in a long-term relationship. I guess this is where I asked the obvious and questioned why someone who is just asking about your favorite books, movies, etc., would be driven away by the fact that you have a girlfriend. And he said he didn't know why he did it, and that it was a massive mistake. At the risk of seeming toxic, and I will take full accountability for seeming so or being so, I asked him to please deactivate his Instagram for the time being while we sort through this, his Twitter as well. He did, and though I was feeling a bit of relief about that, I couldn't help but feel a bit saddened that he didn't choose to do that on his own for the benefit of our relationship. He had to wait for me to ask, which again, just made me feel like such a toxic and controlling partner. 2 things I always strive to be so far from. When he got home from work, we discussed everything at massive length, and he continued to swear up and down that these conversations pertained strictly to music, movies, and books, and he didn't have interest in her. Just interest in the initial rush of the attention he was receiving. We read a few articles, and he broke things down to me as his self-esteem has never been lower. Despite his career as a doctor being at a high, and his finances in order, he felt things with his music weren't taking off. And with that came a feeling that he wasn't special, and it was nice for someone to make him feel that way. I felt shame and asked him if I wasn't doing enough or giving enough to him to make him feel that way. He said I defiantly was. But my love and attention and affection became a pillar he could rely on and got used to, so with new attention came a rush. And he liked that. I asked him if he wanted to be single and find that rush in dating new people. And he kept insisting that that's so far from what he wants. He wants to remain a couple and do all he can to work on these things together. Though I can't help but correlate that feeling he enjoys with the feeling of a first date. Which hurts, of course. I told him I didn't really see how we could move past this because there was nothing much for me to make an attempt to work on moving forward. This seems to be a self-stemming problem that I emphasize with, but just don't want to be on the receiving end of the counter effects. So though it is incredibly uneasy to begin to think of how difficult it'll be to begin again, it is just as difficult to think about how difficult it would be to stay and try to rebuild back up an issue that I feel like just a bystander. When it comes to, this has all been very painful, and if this comes to an end, I just want it to be as civil and as possible. He deserves to love himself, but not at the expense of the love we have between us. I deserve love that is stable and comforting, and not laced with newfound paranoia. Despite this all, my heart is still very much in this, of course, and he has been very vocal about how it was just one mistake. Nothing happened, we can work through this, etc. And I secretly keep hoping he will make a step, any step really, to showcase these words and implement action, seek a new therapist. Find the two of us a relationship counselor, buy a book on self-help or on how couple conquer affairs, anything at all. Without me having to be the one to ask him. I just want him to have that yearning that he continues to say he has, but instead of saying it, I was him to show me. That makes me irrational or just plain dumb. I believe to be in a state where I can handle either answer. Or something completely different just the same. Do all think I'm blowing something completely out of proportion? Given how this was an exchange of conversation between him and another girl for just a few days. And his erasure of me on his profile was only for about 2 days? This has been a first in this relationship, this has been a first in my life truthfully. I just felt completely vulnerable and isolated.